Let's turn our attention to our first presentation today. Our speakers this morning are Mitch Prinstein and Eva Telzer. They are the co-directors of the Winston Center on Technology and Brain Development at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. They are leading authorities in understanding the impact of technology, AI, and social media on the developing mind and brain. Their research studies are frequently featured in the media and provide guidance to national officials. Mitch is also the John Van Seters Distinguished Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience at UNC and the immediate past Chief of Psychology Strategy and Integration at the American Psychological Association. That's a pretty big deal. Eva is UNC Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience and the Associate Editor at Child Development and Social Cognitive and Affective Neuroscience. They are presenting to us from Chapel Hill this morning. If you have questions in the virtual audience, if you have questions that you would like to pose at any point this morning to presenters for either of our two programs, you can email them to Alberti, ALBERTIC, at buffalo.edu. albertic@buffalo.edu. You can see it up on the screen. So let's see if we can bring the image of, there they are. Wonderful. Hi, Mitch. Hi, Eva. So glad you're with us today, and take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having us here. We're really honored to be a part of this day and this wonderful tradition that you have to really focus on safe kids. We're going to be talking about smart technology, and we wanted to give you a broad overview of what the scientific literature is telling us so far, although this is a rapidly changing literature, as well as some concrete takeaway steps that we can each rely on to try and help keep kids safe. So it's probably not escaped your attention that kids are growing up in a very different world than they were just a few decades ago. When young people are spending time together, it no longer looks like this or like this, but rather like this. And it seems that kids are, even when they're together, remarkably focused on devices, which could be tablets, smart watches, or their phones. And kids are having an incredibly difficult time even getting off of their phones when they want to. And we'll talk about that more in just a bit. We want to talk about this in the context of understanding why it is that devices and AI and social media are now intersecting with adolescent development in a way that may be a perfect storm or incompatible with how it is that the brain has been developing for many years. So, of course, we all know that as we go through puberty, our body is changing in dramatic and important ways. What it's important to remember is about a year or two before our body starts to show the external signs of pubertal development, the brain has already begun its massive reorganization and growth. In fact, a period of time second only to the first year of life, and how important this period is for brain development. But the brain is not developing all regions at the same time. Actually, it's one region at a time that we see changes starting as early as around 10 years old and going all the way until around the mid 20s or so. Now, the first region of the brain that's starting to change is changing because of an increase in receptors for two brain chemicals that you've probably heard about before in an area of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex or the ventral striatum. And those brain receptors are for oxytocin and dopamine. Oxytocin, as you probably know, is a substance that makes us very interested in interacting with others around our age. Even mice during their 1 week of adolescence are more interested in hanging out with other adolescent mice than they are adult mice because of that early development of oxytocin receptors in that area of the brain. The other substance is called dopamine, which you've probably heard about. And that means that it leads us to feel a sense of reward, or it feels really good whenever we get attention, feedback, or we have power or influence over our peers. So while this change is happening in this area of the brain that makes us rapidly n- become invested in peer contact and feedback from our peers, we have a much slower development occurring in the very front of the brain, just below our forehead. And that's called the prefrontal cortex. That area of the brain you could think of as the brain's brakes. It's the part that tells us not to follow every impulse that we might have. Well, as you can see, between the ages of around 9 or 10, all the way until our mid 20s, we have a big difference. You could think of it as, in terms of social interactions, our brain is kind of all gas pedal, driving us to look for more and more and more of that stimulation and feedback, with very weak brakes. And that doesn't start to uh, become a little bit more aligned until we're in our mid 20s or so. This is important because in a world where we went to school and had lots of peer feedback for certain hours of the day, and then we went home where we had relatively less peer feedback, the brain fit our environment. But now the brain is still based on the millennia of evolution that has led to the way that we develop today. But in just a couple of decades, we now have kids able to get that oxytocin and dopamine response 24/7 simply through the press of a button. So we have brains developed for a world that does not have digital stimulation. And now we have excessive digital stimulation. We're going to talk about a wide array of areas where we have been able to study the ways that this new world is having an effect on the development of kids' brains and on their social psychological development and mental health as well. We do want to mention, though, at the outset that when we're talking about these different digital experiences, we're talking about a wide array of different things. There are now so many devices that kids might have access to, even those that their school might be giving them as early as kindergarten, helping them develop relationships with devices, as well as things that they might be wearing around their necks, wrists, or might be holding in their hands at all times. We also want to mention that when we talk about social media, we're actually talking about a wide array of things. Social media is not just the content that kids might post or they might see others have posted, but it's also functions built into the platform, the like button, the endless scroll, the notifications that change the way that we consume that content. For instance, one study found that when looking at illegal activity or immoral or dangerous behavior, photos depicting that kind of behavior, the brain's prefrontal cortex is less activated if you simply show that content with a like icon next to it, suggesting that the content got a number of likes, saying that it's the platforms themselves, not just the content, that's changing how the brain is responding to this information, which then has an implication on kids' development. And of course, AI has changed everything very, very quickly, including sending friends and content to kids that they never asked for. AI now includes generative AI like ChatGPT, that many of you are familiar with, companion AI, where kids can feel like they're having interactions with their favorite fictional or characters or real life celebrities, and even AI toys that are built for infants to age 6 years old. So their favorite teddy bear or fantasy character now talks to them, remembers their name, and tailors advertisements to them based on what it can see through its teddy bear eyes in the child's home environment. In our center, we are interested not in characterizing how all of these things are good or bad, but rather a more nuanced question: under what conditions and for which kids might there be certain aspects of these digital experiences that could be helpful or might present risk for youth development? So, we are very quickly going to review 11 different questions that we have used to unpack this overall issue. What are the different ways in which tech is changing the environment that kids grow up in, and how might each of these ways present help or risk? Well, should mention right off the bat that, of course, social media, AI, it's not necessarily all bad. There are possible ways that you can use tech in order to enhance development. For instance, many parents report a remarkably high level of anxiety about their child's safety and about their children's whereabouts, or simply want to have contacts with their kids if they need to change their pickup schedule. And smart devices do offer a way for parents to feel a little bit better about that. School issued devices are allowing for a gamification of things like learning your multiplication tables or other kinds of more rote tasks in school that now kids will engage in for more time than they would have if it was not made into a game. And social media is providing some kids with the opportunity to find others who share a similar identity. That might be a racial, ethnic, gender, sexual, religious identity group where they are the only in their school or community or even in their own households with that identity. And they're finding others who share the same kinds of stressful daily experiences of being in a minority. Some kids are developing online only friendships. It's absolutely critical that we make sure that those are real peers and not predators posing as young folks. But if they are genuine online only friendships, those can be really helpful for kids' development. Research finds that we have greater diversity among our friends online than we do among our friends offline. And we also know that AI chatbots might be able to provide some kids with some information or even some general support, especially important if those are folks who might not have access to care otherwise because of financial or geographic limitations to who might be in their area. It's important to remember, however, that although these positive features are possible, it seems that devices and platforms have more and more made it difficult for kids to access these benefits. In fact, just recently, social media companies testifying on the Hill indicated that they no longer see their products as being social media because they believe that their products are now designed to direct kids more and more to strangers than actually to friends. And they, as a result, are making it harder and harder for kids to be able to find that connection with others. Of course, teens may use technology in so many different ways. And very often we're asked, how many hours a day is it okay for my kid to be using their device? And we say, well, it depends. If they're reading the New York Times and they're talking with their friends about it in direct messaging texts for 11 hours a day, that might be good. Of course, we don't know any teens that actually used their devices in that way. But in fact, what we do know is that most teens tell us that one of the things they do the most is they go online to compare themselves to others and to try and get as many followers as they can. It's important to know that that is something that is related to, it's a bad way of using social media or devices. It's related to increases in depressive symptoms, in anxiety, and also given the nature of folks posting selfies, we see that folks have negative body image as a result. This is happening a lot for those who identify as female, but also increasingly so among males as well. So it's important that we help kids recognize that if they're going online and spending a lot of time noticing how others seem to have a better appearance, better social lives, or more access to friends or fancy vacations, these are not necessarily representative and honest depictions of other people's lives. But nevertheless, kids forget that and compare themselves to others anyway. Particularly concerning is the extent to which we see that kids are exposed to cyber hate. Now, cyber hate can be online bullying, but it also can be discrimination that's directed specifically towards those that are members of a minoritized group. A very recent study found that among African American youth, there are opportunities when kids might find things online that help them to feel positive and a strong sense of identity with their own African American identity. However, that was just under half of what kids saw on a given day. Just outpacing that was the extent to which kids were exposed to cyber hate, discrimination, depiction of racial trauma, and algorithmic bias, in which they are shown that a more ideal life or more ideal values are traditionally held by folks who are white. As a result, these this cyber hate is not only more frequent in number or instances that kids are being exposed to on a given day, but it seems to be associated with later anxiety and depression, even when accounting for how much these kids are experiencing discrimination offline. There are a few reasons for that. It seems that what kids are posting online is often harsher than what happens offline because they can post that anonymously. It's also the case that with likes and reposts and comments, you see a pile-on effect occur where not only are kids experiencing discrimination, but they're seeing just how many others might agree or augment those horrible statements about one's own identity. Interestingly, the results are showing that increases in anxiety and depression are not just for those in the minoritized group that is being targeted by, but also by bystanders who have loved ones or friends who might be who might share a similar identity, and just seeing that this is happening to others is related to anxiety and depression too. Interestingly, these positive experiences do not seem to buffer the effects of the negative experiences at all, which is tragic, but all too frequent. Remarkably, a large number of sites and communities online are actually teaching kids how to engage in illegal, dangerous, or disordered behavior. Many years ago, a study was done to look at one example of this, and that's called non suicidal self injury. That's the extent to which kids might be harming their own body tissue without trying to end their life. Cutting is the most frequent example of this. And over 10 years ago, folks went online and saw that on YouTube, there were a remarkable number of videos that were not only showing kids what cutting and other forms of non suicidal self injury were all about, but they were actually encouraging kids how to engage in this behavior. They were teaching kids how to do so while hiding it from their parents. And they created communities of folks who all cut together or share their cutting experiences with one another. If kids reported on these platforms that they were stopping this behavior or they had found more adaptive ways to deal with stress, they actually suffered friendship sanctions. They were told, "You're not our friend anymore. We're going to make fun of you for not being a part of our club of cutting." Now, as a result of studies like this, YouTube has since changed their policies. But it's important to know that this is not the case for most social media platforms today, including TikTok. Still, kids can log on today and they can see these exact kinds of videos, platforms, communities, and encouragement to cut. A remarkable number of kids also watch live suicide attempts that folks stream while they are attempting to end their life. And we have a number of kids telling us that they're watching those and exposed to those routinely. All of this is similar to what's been referred to as pro anorexia sites or pro sites. These are some examples of what's referred to as thinspiration or images that are put up to encourage folks to achieve an unhealthy and impossible thinness standard that would be categorized as consistent with anorexia. Um, we see art and also social rules that are put online as well to encourage kids to engage in very dangerous behaviors to change their body shape. Briefly, just wanted to mention that another area where we're seeing concerns online is the extent to which kids seem to be influenced by others simply by the presence of likes. You probably know yourself that it is very easy to overgeneralize when we see things online. If we dare read an article and we go to the comments section, we will probably find a comment or two that makes our blood boil because it espouses exactly everything that we disagree with. And even us as adults might make the error of thinking, oh, that must be what half the country thinks, or I bet there are millions of people who would agree with that comment. We very rarely say, wow, one of the most radical opinions happens to have read the same article as me and made a comment and attribute it to just one person. Well, the same thing happens, if not more so, with teens. In this study, when they saw that other teens were posting things that suggested that they thought that drinking alcohol was cool, and they saw some likes and favorable comments attached to it, it led these eighth graders over the next few months to begin to believe that all of their peers thought that it would be really cool to drink 5 or more alcoholic drinks on a single occasion. That's the definition for heavy episodic drinking. That's a lot of alcohol for an adult, but it's potentially a lethal amount for most eighth graders. Once teens thought that their peers thought that that was cool, it actually predicted their own first heavy episodic drinking episode in the eighth and ninth grade, really demonstrating clearly how what kids are seeing online and the likes and notifications and comments attached to that is changing not only how their brain responds to it, but their own attitudes and then their own actual risk behavior. I should note that this is also a process that could be used to promote positive behaviors like community service or studying. But it seems that the algorithm might be particularly designed to push us towards those things that will make us feel fear or anger. There's a reason for that. When we feel fear or anger, it actually leads to the brain's motivational system to encourage us to engage in more behaviors to try and address those feelings. And it may be the case that because of that, algorithms are designed to push us to think about and to experience more fear and anger, because that will keep us engaged on the platform longer than things that might make us feel good about ourselves or might generally lead to positive outcomes. So, for those of you that did not grow up with any of these digital experiences or platforms, we look at kids often and we wonder, why do they spend so much time on this? None of us did that. We all turned out relatively fine. Our kids just absolutely loving every minute of this. And it's important to know that they're not. In fact, kids report an equal amount of both positive and negative emotional experiences whenever they're spending time online. And a lot of the negative experiences come from a new kind of stress that they experience that we don't. Imagine for a second that if in the 70s or 80s, when you were growing up, there was a way in which kids were walking around with an 8 by 10 glossy photograph of themselves and asking everyone they passed down the hallway, am I hot? Do I look good? What do you think about my photo? And people were giving them thumbs up and numerical counts that attached to them as they walked down the hall. So everyone could see how many votes one another got. Or imagine that when you were home after school, you suddenly went outside and there was skywriting above your house that said, the most popular kid in school is talking about you right now. This is literally what it's like for kids today. And they feel a tremendous amount of pressure. They're getting notifications from all of these platforms simultaneously to the extent that they feel like they have to respond or get rid of all of the different notices, things they've been tagged in, ways in which they have to connect with others. Their devices are constantly beeping and buzzing at them. And because of that dopamine and oxytocin kind of increase in receptors happening at around this period of time, they feel that this is critical social information that they have to be a part of. They have to know what's going on. They do not want to miss out on whatever the gossip or discussion, or frankly, the conversations about them that might be going on, because the next day they'll be lost at school. They won't know what the conversations are, and they want to make sure their own reputations are okay. When friends post a selfie, the rule is you have to go online within 10 minutes and tell them that they look amazing publicly by liking and commenting on their photo. If you don't, friends today have a right to tell you that you're being a bad friend, and it creates a lot of stress among the person who made the post. In fact, so much so that when kids make their own posts, we hear that they are spending 30 minutes doing absolutely nothing but staring at their own post to make sure that they're getting only favorable and plentiful comments rather than they're getting nothing or that they're getting canceled online. This combination of stressors is referred to in the literature as digital stress. And when we ask kids around 14 to 15 years old, we find out that about 45% of them are experiencing so much digital stress that it's interfering with their daily roles and routines. This is something where they are not able to finish their homework, go to sleep, exercise, even engage in personal hygiene because they're experiencing so much digital stress. The more stress they experience in one year, the more depression they report in our studies a year later. Okay, I'm going to turn it over here to Dr. Telzer.
Great, thank you so much. So, one of the most important aspects of healthy development in adolescence is getting good quality sleep. Unfortunately, there is a sleep epidemic among adolescents, in part because of their changing biological systems. Their circadian rhythm shifts around puberty, which pushes them to stay up later, but they have to wake up early for school. And because of this, the majority of adolescents are not getting the recommended 8 hours of sleep per night. This graph here is showing the number of high schoolers who are getting that 8 hour recommended sleep. And in ninth grade, not even half of adolescents are getting the recommended 8 hours of sleep. And by the end of high school, only about 25% of adolescents are getting that 8 hours of recommended sleep. This is very concerning because poor sleep is linked to a host of negative outcomes. It's linked to obesity, depression, risky behaviors, poor school performance, you name it. And inadequate sleep is linked to that in adolescence. Now, these stats are not even taking into consideration what's happening when adolescents are on their devices, interacting with their peers on social media, and this really interferes with their sleep even more. About 60% of adolescents report that they are on their devices in the hour before sleep. Meta analytic studies, where they look across lots and lots and lots of research studies, show that nighttime smartphone use is associated with poor sleep health. We've done some work that shows that when adolescents are on their phones at night, they end up going to bed later. Because they have to wake up at the same time the next day, they end up getting shorter sleep durations. And their sleep is also more fragmented. So when adolescents wake up in the middle of the night and they reach over for their device, they end up staying awake longer in the middle of the night during that wake event. So their sleep is more disrupted throughout the night. And this is very concerning because there's also work that we've done that shows that when adolescents are getting this poor sleep, this disrupted sleep, more fragmented sleep, it relates to disparities in brain health over the following year. So they show lower white matter in their brains a year later. White matter is supposed to be increasing across adolescence. White matter is the parts of our brains that speed information across networks. It allows for quicker thinking, better skills, learning. And so this is in contrast to what our brains should be doing. So when adolescents are using their devices at night, oftentimes this is due to that digital stress that Dr. Prinstein was talking about. They feel so compelled to stay on their phones very late. It's taking away their ability to sleep well, and that is interfering with their sleep health. So this is very concerning for adolescents today. Now, there's a point at which social media use can become habitual, problematic, and even show signs that it is a behavior that is clinically dependent, problematic, so to speak. We've looked at this by taking the DSM criteria for substance use dependence and taking out the word for different substances, whether that be alcohol or cocaine or other drugs, and swapping in the word social media. And we've asked adolescents these various questions to see if they are dependent upon social media and if it's interfering with their daily lives. So, for example, do you feel like you spend more time on social media than you intended? Have you ever tried to spend time away from social media, but you couldn't do it? Do you ever expend extra effort to make sure you have access to social media? Do you have cravings and desires for it? Does it interfere with these aspects of things you're supposed to be doing: sleep, exercise, schoolwork? And then we also ask adolescents subjectively, do you think that you might be addicted to social media? Perhaps adults want to reflect on some of these items too, because it's not just teens who are showing these signs of problematic and dependent use. Um, but when we ask our adolescents, we find that nearly all are reporting that they're spending more time on social media than they intended. About half report that that being away from social media is resulting in difficulties in their daily activities, and about a quarter are perceiving that they are actually moderately or severely addicted to social media. These results generalize across many countries now that have done research showing that about half of adolescents are showing these signs of clinical dependence upon social media. So it is certainly causing problems among adolescents, interfering with their daily lives. They're unable to stop themselves from engaging in the behaviors, even though they really want to. And this is perhaps no coincidence. There have been some documents that have come out in recent litigations. These are examples from TikTok and Meta showing that the platforms themselves are literally designed to be addictive, that they are designed to not only be addictive, generally speaking, but also that teenagers are the golden audience for this, as shown in the TikTok quotes here on the left. They are designing the platforms knowing that adolescents are going to engage in compulsive use on the platform. And as the Meta quote is showing, there is this little dopamine hit every once in a while, and it is going to give you that little dopamine hit that, especially for adolescents, is going to get them sucked into that platform during this developmental period that we talked about, when adolescents' prefrontal cortex is still developing, making it very hard for them to slow down, turn away, and say no to engaging on these platforms. Smartphone use has become an issue in schools as well, devices more generally speaking, but also the mobility of adolescents' own devices in schools. It causes extreme levels of distraction, not only for the person using their device, but for their peers around them. Research shows that when an adolescent in the classroom is on their device and that they are engaging in off task work, whether that is on their smartphone or on the school issued device, but not engaging in the lesson, for example, scrolling on some other platform or DMing a friend. This is not only going to cause issues to the user's learning and ability to engage in school, but also to their peers around them. There's perhaps this misperception that we are good at multitasking, that we can engage in having our feet up on a screen and listening to music and doing homework. But we, generally speaking, are bad at this, and adolescents are especially bad at this. In effect, this turns into task shifting, where adolescent attention is being diverted to different tasks at hand, and then they don't engage well in that deep thinking and learning that they need. Devices in school are also leading to increased teacher distress. There's research coming out showing that teachers themselves are very unhappy with devices in the classroom, that it's causing them to be more or less satisfied with their job, less able to engage with their students in the classroom. We have work that has come out just to show the sheer quantity of how much adolescents are on their own devices. And it's really striking. This figure on the left here is showing that middle school adolescents, so 12 to 13, are on their devices a little bit less than high school students in the darker bars. But on average, adolescents are spending about 20 minutes, or a third of every hour of the school day, on their smartphone. This is largely not engaging in any classroom or learning activities, because when we look at what they're doing on their devices, what apps are they using, 70% of their smartphone use is on social media and entertainment apps like YouTube. So the majority of their time they are on off task activities like social media. So when they should be learning and spending time either engaging with their peers or listening in the classroom, they are behind their device in the class on social media apps. So this is very concerning for their ability to engage and develop good cognitive performance. In fact, this is research from thousands of adolescents in a large national study that is showing that when adolescents are using high levels or increasing levels of social media use, depicted here in these red bars, across the board, they're showing lower cognitive performance, including lower memory, lower reading, and lower cognitive skills overall. So among high social media users, it's really interfering with their cognitive development. Now, AI chatbots have become an increasing concern. We've been studying social media for decades now. But AI chatbots have come around really, really recently. And already over 70% of teens report that they're using AI chatbots. This is taking away time that they should be or could be spending with human interactions with their peers or family. They are engaging in high levels of interactions with a machine, with a computer. And this is particularly concerning because of the ways that chatbots are designed. There's been some emerging research really suggesting that they're not promoting the social competencies that children and adolescents need. These platforms, these AI chatbots are frictionless. They don't argue. They are very agreeable. There's oftentimes a appropriate amount of feeling and caring that goes into it that makes these types of social interactions just very different from what an adolescent might experience in a face-to-face human interaction. Adolescents are now reporting that they turn to AI more so than their parents or trusted teachers to ask questions about things. And chatbots are certainly not they are not a valid or appropriate place to get a lot of information, and a lot of misinformation is often provided to adolescents. Unfortunately, chatbots are completely unregulated. Many adolescents are turning to chatbots for therapy, and this is certainly not appropriate when chatbots are posing as therapists, even calling themselves therapists or psychologists. Adolescents, even adults, may rely and trust these chatbots in ways that are unhealthy and not appropriate. Chatbots are also using data, and not oftentimes the best data, scraped from the internet to give responses. Kids are sharing their data, excuse me, and oftentimes do not um, understand the consent that goes into providing that data to these chatbots. This is the case with social media accounts as well. And so there's oftentimes a large misuse of data as well as personal likeness that's happening. When we have recently looked at what adolescents are using chatbots for, the rates are kind of scary. Adolescents are using chatbots a lot of times for sexual exploration, which may not be completely concerning, but when you look at the content of the conversations, it's oftentimes has a tone of sexual violence related to it, whether that is coming from the chatbot or whether adolescents are using this as a space to explore that. We don't yet know, but this is a very concerning aspect. And much more research and time needs to go into understanding this and regulating these AI chatbots. And of course, this is happening at earlier and earlier ages. There are now chatbot toys for children as young as 0 to 6 years of age. And so this is especially concerning as children are now being raised potentially by a computer rather than interacting with human parents and peers and teachers. And so it is very concerning. Chatbots cannot replace humans to raise our children. I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Prinstein real quick because I need to get some water and I will be back shortly.
Sure. So another area that we've been exploring, and then we'd like to turn to some recommendations, is the extent to which we see that device use, particularly on social media, is related to brain development. And the way that we've been doing that is we've been actually able to look specifically at how kids are using their devices and what's changing in their brain over time. One study that was not one that we were a part of demonstrated importantly that watching short form videos, things that you would see on TikTok or Instagram, is actually changing cortical thickness in a way that's particularly concerning. That is related to more ADHD like symptoms. We are seeing that the more that kids are using their phones during their school time, the less their cognitive control. Again, the more we're going to see that impulsive, kind of inattentive type of style. And that was confirmed, as I mentioned, and research that showed that over time, the size of the cortex, it was actually growing to be less thick as a function of how much kids were using their screens, particularly in areas that would lead them to have more clinical dependency on their devices and in areas that would make them exhibit ADHD like symptoms. So we are seeing this concern with the way that screens might be changing the brain development in a way that's very concerning. We've also collected our own data regarding brain development. Eva, can I turn it back to you?
Yes, great,
Okay.
thank you. So, we've collected objective smartphone data from our own adolescents to try to get a sense of how frequently adolescents are using their phones. We get this data from their device. They send us the screenshots of their usage every day for 14 days. And what this gives us is very objective, rich data across multiple days and thousands of data points across our adolescents. And so if we look at the raw data, this is a depiction of just the sheer frequency with which adolescents are using the devices. The top bar here is depicting every adolescent is a dot. Every one of these columns is a day of data collection. And this here is the average number of times they're picking up and checking their phones every day. The range here is from 0 to 400 times a day. On average, adolescents are picking up and checking their phones 100 times a day, but some adolescents are doing this upwards of 400 times a day. So they are just constantly checking their phones. And when we look at the average time that they're spending on their phones, this bottom figure here again is showing every dot here is an adolescent. Every one of the columns here is a day of data collection. They're spending an average of over 8 hours on their smartphone. Again, the range here is extreme from 0 to over 1,000 minutes a day. So some adolescents are spending upwards of over 16 hours a day on their device. They are glued to their devices. They cannot put them down. They cannot stop checking them. And so our question is, what is this behavior related to? We think that it is likely related to their reward seeking tendencies, as well as an inability to engage in cognitive control that's likely shaping their brain development. Indeed, when we look in the media hour after teens have used social media to connect with their peers, they're reporting this increased sensation seeking, so this reward seeking behavior, and they crave more social interaction. So, despite having gone on to connect with their peers, that very behavior is leading to them wanting more. They want more social connections and more rewards. And unfortunately, by the end of the day, that very behavior of using social media to connect with their peers is related to increased loneliness. So, going online to connect with peers is not fulfilling that need to interact and gain social rewards from our peers. Now, when we look at what's happening in the developing brain, we have scanned adolescents longitudinally over 3 years. We've used fMRI to look, it's like a window into the developing brain, and we can see what is changing in their brain as they grow up and how might this social media behavior be shaping and rewiring the way their brain is developing. This here is showing a trajectory of brain development across time. We have age here on the figure on this line graph, and the orange line that's going down, this is showing the areas of the brain that respond to our social and reward context are developmentally decreasing across time. As we mature, their brains, those who are not checking their social media accounts, are showing these age appropriate declines in social reward sensitivity over time. In sharp contrast, this blue line here is showing those adolescents who are constantly checking their social media accounts, and their brains are becoming hypersensitive to their social worlds in these areas of the brain that are highly salient to social and peer feedback. So their brains are becoming hyper tuned to their social world. In other words, social media behaviors are rewiring their brains to seek out and pay more attention to these social rewards, as well as in areas of the brain involved in executive control, are also showing impaired development in these habitual social media checkers. So, social media seems to be reshaping the way the adolescent brain is developing in potential ways that may have long term implications as they become older adolescents and adults. So I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Prinstein to give a few tips on what we can do.
So as you can see, the emerging data is starting to demonstrate all kinds of ways that this may be having an effect on kids' development. We absolutely need more research. We absolutely need to look for long-term effects. But at this point, the American Psychological Association felt that there was enough information to issue health advisories to make sure that families, schools, parents, and others are aware of what seems to be emerging so far and really direct folks on things that could be done right away. The first, of course, is to wait before kids have unfettered access to their own devices. There's no data to suggest that kids suffer any long term negative consequences if they are not having a phone. This is a concern because most parents report that the only reason why they gave in and let their kids have a device or gain access to social media is they didn't want their kids to be the only ones not on there, which of course makes perfect sense. We can all understand that pressure that we experience as parents. But research is starting to show that if parents can band together and find others to say, we'll wait if you wait, that seems to be a way that we can help kids understand that they're not going to be the only one and that we are looking at the data. And just like we do for many other things, as we seek results that are concerning, we want to protect our children from what might be harmful. The other thing that we can do is if kids are using their devices is to help them try to use the devices to develop the skills that adolescents are supposed to be developing during this time. Adolescence is the time that we move from kind of just playing with our friends or hanging out with them to having more relationships where we can confide in one another, we can experience a sense of emotional intimacy. We can start to rely and trust peers. That's supposed to be the skills that kids develop during these years. In fact, the ways in which they do so ends up predicting how successful they are in their marriages, as parents, and in their jobs. So if we deprive kids of those complex relationship skill learning opportunities during these years, there's good reason to think that they're going to have lifelong difficulties in those areas. Using the direct message feature or posting things that help kids to actually learn about one another and continuing those conversations offline is a way that you can use these platforms to try and build social support skills, the ability to understand and empathize with one another. But it does mean helping kids to toggle back and forth between what they're learning online and then in person, or at least face to face, voice to voice interactions where they can have more in depth conversations. We should absolutely be wary of any platforms that are offering open chat or adult content or AI driven content where kids might be interacting with those who are either posing as young people but are actually predators, or who might not actually be human, who are bots pretending to be humans. It's really important that kids are only exposed to what it is that their families and communities feel is appropriate. And there are absolutely no regulations right now. Most of us might pick a toy up off the shelf and assume surely someone has made sure that this is safe for my child before I can buy it at a regular store. That is true at Toys R Us. That is not true online. No one has determined that these things are safe and appropriate. We have no federal regulations whatsoever. It's particularly important to note that in the United States, our children are getting the worst versions of these platforms compared to kids around the world. Other governments have already put regulations into place to try and change some of these features for kids, but nothing has passed at the United States federal government. So our kids are getting the versions of these platforms with all of these negative features still included. We cannot look over our kids' shoulder every day to try and see what they're doing online. But we can do first, we can restrict their time online with parental controls. I wish those controls were a lot easier to set up than they should be. I have a colleague at protectyoungeyes.org who has set up a website to instruct you how to put parental controls together on every device for each and every platform. That's protectyoungeyes.org. But we can also be actively monitoring our kids by talking with them on at least a weekly basis about what they're doing online, what they're seeing, what they believe, helping them to understand why people like things they don't actually like, why they post things that are not actually true, and helping them to know that when they have questions or they've seen something disturbing, they should come to you. You're not going to be someone that just mocks them for all the time that they spend online. We should absolutely have laws that take down content that depicts illegal or maladaptive behavior online and encourage kids to engage in it. We don't have those laws right now. And we know that about half of kids will be exposed to this content before they graduate high school. If you would like to have a conversation with your kids about these things before they see them online, then you need to proactively have that conversation before kids get a device or before they get on social media platforms. Otherwise, it is important to go ahead and follow up with them afterwards and ask them specifically, have they ever seen somebody hurt themselves, talk about hurting others, talk about engaging in behaviors that might hurt their bodies? And what do they think about that content? And what would they do if they or their friends were exposed to or posted that content? Similarly, we should take down content immediately that is promoting discrimination or cyber hate. The platforms can tag and take this down, but they're not in the United States. So we will need to talk with our kids about the eventuality that they will see this content. What will they do and how will they feel when they see this? We have been for many years talking about how we believe it would be helpful for pediatricians and school nurses to have signs of problematic or addiction like markers of screen time up on the doctor's wall so kids and their physicians and their parents can have conversations about it. We now have pediatricians who have taken us up on this, and we are starting to do projects here in North Carolina where we are putting these posters up in doctors' offices. If you all would like to be a part of that in Buffalo, please let us know. If you remember nothing else from what we've said today, please take all the devices in the house, that means your own as well, and charge them in a room that is not your bedrooms. Model that for your kids and definitely get those devices out of your kids' bedrooms by 9 or 10 o'clock on a school night. They need that sleep. They need to see that just like in the olden days when it was rude to call someone over 10 p.m., we are setting a boundary. At 10 p.m., we put our devices on sleep mode so everyone can see that we're not able to view their texts right now. And we charge them far, far away from our nightstands. It's really hard to tell people not to compare themselves to others. That's a totally natural human thing. But for the first time in the history of our species, our brains, which are really built to help us believe and make sense of what we see, have to be retrained to not believe what we see. Because in many cases, I should say, a lot of what we see, it's not human, it's not real, it's a photoshopped image or it's a filtered image. And we have to get kids to think every time they see something online, is that real, is that even human, has that been altered? Probably it is not representative of what people really look like, what they really do, and what friends they really spend time with every single day. We don't let kids start driving as soon as they come of age. We make sure that they are able to understand the rules of the road and even demonstrate with their own performance that they can keep themselves safe. But for some reason, we often give kids devices in schools or at home, and we don't give them the kind of training that might be helpful to make sure they understand the rules of the road online or that they can demonstrate that they are actually able to avoid the errors and the problems. This is a brief outline of a curriculum that was suggested by APA to help kids to learn what they would need before they're able to use their devices. In fact, recently we have been meeting more and more with kids themselves, going to high schools and to middle schools, meeting with large assemblies of kids to tell them the information in an age appropriate way that we just told all of you. But we do a little bit more. We try to empower young people to think about their own use of devices and social media. We do that very simply by asking them if they can tell us why it is that people invented social media. Is it the case that some really, really smart, really wealthy people in the Pacific Northwest have decided to do a favor to children by making it easier for them to get to know their peers? Most kids know that it's not that benevolent. Someone's making money, but they don't understand who is making money and they don't understand how data are being used. So we show them on your device right now, if you go to the App Store and you look up a popular social media platform and you scroll all the way to the bottom on the App Store's listing of that app, you will see a section called privacy. It's been there the whole time. I haven't yet met a kid who ever saw it. Many adults don't know it's there either. But if you go to that privacy section, at least on Apple, you will see that it tells you very explicitly these data on your device are being taken by this platform. And let me tell you, when we show this to kids, they are very, very concerned that they never saw this before. All the hands go up. They want to know, wait a minute, what if my profile is private? Doesn't matter. All these data are still being taken from your device. What if I am not using Instagram at that moment? Doesn't matter. All these data are still being taken from your device. How you pay for things, where you are, who you talk to, every website you've ever visited, every search that you've ever put in. It's all being taken. It's all being used to make a few people a lot of money. I usually then ask the kids, raise your hand if you have received a check for how much your data has made a profit for others. No one has raised their hand, and kids get very upset when they realize, wait a minute, how come my data are being used to make someone else a profit? I think when kids are able to understand the ways in which their own time, brains, behaviors are being used to make someone else money, they are very interested in changing their behavior and not being used. We hope that this is a really helpful overview, really fast, of a lot of different areas of research about the ways that adolescents' brains are changing. If you have any ways that we can be helpful, you're more than welcome to contact us at the Winston Center at UNC. But also, I believe we might have some time for a few questions if there are any within the audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mitch and Eva. That was a powerful program. Thank you so much. I trust you can hear me. Great. My name is Bill Regan. I've been corresponding with you, Mitch, over these past few months. Welcome to Buffalo. Eva, welcome to Buffalo. Again, a great, great talk. I am in-house at the Center for the Arts. I will take the microphone to any of our audience members who have questions. My partner in crime here with planning the Safe Schools program, Bree Kishel, is monitoring questions that are being gathered from our virtual audience, so we'll flip back and forth with questions from in-house and virtual. So, in-house, do I have any hands? Nobody has any questions? That's over here, okay. Please tell us your name and speak into the microphone. Thank you.
Sure. My name is Ruby McKelvey. I'm a school psychologist. I work for the Buffalo Public Schools. My question for the presenters is that you may have heard about the murder of the 10 blacks at the Top supermarket a couple of years ago. The attorney who's representing the families is using hate speech from social media as part of his argument. And I would just like to know what your thoughts are as to the viability of that approach. Thank you.
Well, of course, it's hard to comment on any specific case without knowing the ways in which, without knowing the details. But As you saw from our presentation, there are a remarkable number of kids who are exposed to cyber hate. And we are seeing that cyber hate, especially with likes, comments, forwards attached to it, it is relevant to how the brain is processing that information and how adolescents engage in their own belief system and their own behaviors as a result. So this is a concern. We've seen it with adults as well, that what's happening online is changing attitudes and beliefs in ways that may not be representative or accurate with how people actually think.
Okay, we have a question from our virtual audience. How does the youth data compare to adults? For example, if youth suffer from anxiety, depression, and lower body image, how much more is that compared to adults that engage in the same activities?
I think that there's a couple ways to think about this question. I think one of the key considerations when it comes to children and adolescents is that their brains and bodies are developmentally changing in very important ways. Their bodies are changing because of puberty, which makes body image more important and impactful. And their brains are also much more sensitive to social feedback from their peers. They're less able to engage in that cognitive control. Rewards are so much more salient. And because of this, because of all of these both physically biological as well as neurobiological changes in the brain, it makes these social media experiences much more impactful and profound. It's not to say at all that it doesn't impact adults, because it does impact adults too. It's just much more powerful among adolescents.
We have another question from an in-house, audience member.
Good morning. A question I have, my name is Brett Carruthers, and a question that I have is, a number of states have implemented social media and smart device bans during the school day. Have you done any research, or have you seen research what impact these are having across the school community and with adolescents?
Yes, we are working with the country of Australia to look at the effects of their social media ban on youth. A ban is a pretty blunt instrument. There are possible ways that social media can help folks, including those from minoritized communities. So a ban, unfortunately, has the potential to take away some of those positives. So we are collecting data right now to see how those bans might be having an effect on folks. We've also been working a lot with schools and communities where phones have been banned from schools. We don't know yet whether what they call a bell to bell, or in other words, a ban of the device from the entire time kids are in school, is any better or worse than times that kids are using their phones in instructional time. We feel pretty confident saying that during instructional time, kids should not have phones. We also feel pretty confident saying that kids should have some limitations, so that way they're not experiencing clinical dependency on their devices. But the data are still out on whether there's a safe amount that's okay. And of course, all this is complicated by the fact that AI and platform devices are happening all the time. So we're doing the research as fast as we can as the platforms are changing themselves.
Okay, another question from in-house.
Hi, I'm Chris Russell, Community Prevention Coordinator for the Scott Beeler Child Advocacy Center at Best Self here in Buffalo. And as we all know, a lot of influencers have made a lot of money being influencers, and that's one of the big reasons why some teens continue to use social media. Is there any data or statistics that can be shared with you to show like the realistic approach, or the realistic ability to become rich and become one of these big positive influencers? And is there any research as far as positive use of influencing on teens' use as far as technology, bullying, cyberbullying, or anything along those lines?
Yeah, we've actually done some work where we've looked at, we've asked for kids' recognition of youth and young folks who are leaders within the world versus YouTube influencers. Kids know the names of influencers more than those who are doing wonderful, amazing things within our community. So this is a real phenomenon, and it does make kids really attracted to this as a potential profession. I have met with a number of influencers who have talked about what this really looks like on the ground. And the bottom line is that becoming a giant Hollywood celebrity is about the same kind of odds as becoming one of these very well-known influencers. There are millions of people trying, but only a few really break through. So kids think that it's very easy. They can just do it on their own from home, but it's really, really hard. And the likelihood of them breaking through and being super successful is very, very small. But it takes a tremendous amount of time and a tremendous amount of their own money to really be able to do that successfully, it seems.
Thank you, Mitch. We have one more question from our virtual audience. What has the longitudinal research showed on long-term effects of social media use in adolescents and the impact when they become adults?
There's been quite a few longitudinal studies now. Most of these examine social media across adolescence and have not necessarily extended into adulthood. There are many studies coming out that use longitudinal methods to show the directionality of these effects. So for example, does social media cause depression, or are more depressed adolescents using social media in different ways? Of course, the effects seem to be bidirectional, but more and more research is suggesting the long-term effects of social media on mental health are more pronounced than vice versa. I'm not aware, although I'll let Mitch weigh in if he is, of research that's followed adolescents into adulthood to see the really long-term impacts of these effects. They do seem to be lasting across many, many years into late adolescence, and we know that what's happening in late adolescence should certainly have impacts into adulthood. But I'll turn it over to Mitch if he's aware of any of those longer term.
Yeah, we just don't have enough research data yet, but we have been asking the undergraduates in our class at UNC Chapel Hill, where we teach this over the course of an entire semester, what their experience has been. And they have told us remarkably that they wish they could go back to their 12-year-old times and tell their parents, don't listen to the kid tantruming that